Welcome to Driving the Line, the pursuit of safety, where we talk about the real issues out on the road, focus on safe driving, and learn industry best practices from your hosts Kenny Ray, Mike Bohan, Jim Seibert, and Barry Harrison, and the hopes that by driving the line, we get more drivers home safe and sound. This podcast is made possible by Marsh McLennan Agency.
Well, hello, everyone. Welcome to Driving the Line. I'm Mike Bohan. I'm going to be your host today, and we're discussing the upcoming CVSA International Roadcheck with our guest, Captain Kevin Kelly. Captain Kelly heads up the Commercial Vehicle Enforcement Division at the Missouri State Highway Patrol. He's been in this role for several years. He's a great friend of the industry. And Kevin, I'm grateful that you took a little time today to join us and talk about this Roadcheck that's coming up in May.
Well, I appreciate it, Mike, and I'm glad you had me. And it's always good to work with the industry on these type projects.
That's one thing I've always admired about you, Kevin, is I know you've got a job to do and the guys that you lead have a job to do, but you're always willing to be in the same room with the industry and have those conversations. And I think that means a lot when folks can show up to a MOTA meeting or a conference and you're there and they're able to visit with you. I think that just means the world to our industry, because ultimately we're all kind of working towards the same goal. That's keep the roads safe out there, where these trucks are running up and down the road, keep our drivers safe, keep the public safe. I think we're all after the same thing there.
Yeah, I would agree, Mike. I've been in this a long time, 31 years as a trooper and 14, 15 years doing commercial vehicle enforcement. And, over time you realize that we both have the same goals, and obviously we can't reach those goals unless we work together. And safety and compliance is what we're looking for. We want safe trucks, we want safe drivers. And so working with the industry, is huge for enforcement to be able to get their message out.
Yeah. And you mentioned you've been doing this for 31 years. So I think if I remember right, you're kind of in a unique situation where you've done commercial vehicle enforcement for the majority of that time, right?
I started with the Highway Patrol in 1994, and when we were going through the academy at that time, they certified all of us to do level 3 inspections.
Okay.
Well, at some point during, the years, they quit doing that. However, I kept all my certifications up to date. So then when the training coordinator slot came open in Jeff City to be able to train our folks in 2009, I still had certifications where they would come down here and do that. And then since 2009, I've held every position in this office. So I was a training coordinator. I was the assistant director that dealt with grant funding, and now I'm the director, and I oversee all of the day-to-day operations with the patrol. So, it's been a full career for me in commercial vehicle enforcement. I thoroughly enjoy it. I enjoy the people that we work with. I enjoy industry. It's just been a very good part of my job.
Well, and you mentioned that all the different roles you've held within the Highway Patrol here in Missouri, but we're talking about Roadcheck on this podcast today. But you've been involved with CVSA for probably the majority of that time as well.
I started going to CVSA conferences in 2010. I co-chaired the Driver Traffic Enforcement Committee, for several years. There, I served on the ATA Law Enforcement Executive Board for a couple of years. So I've been able, like I said, to work with industry the largest part of my career, and it's been an absolute joy, to work with the industry and commercial vehicle enforcement.
Well, I know it's greatly appreciated. I know from the folks that I work with, just the way you make yourself available and how your operation runs here in Missouri. We greatly appreciate it because, as you said, we've got a common goal here, and that's to keep the roads safe out there. So. Well, let's talk a little bit about Roadcheck coming up. So May 13th to 15th, we've got a 72-hour Roadcheck coming up. So talk to us a little bit about how maybe what the focus areas are and then how you guys prepare for this. Because I know on the motor carrier side, there's obviously things we can do on our side. But for your guys, for your inspectors out there on the road, how do you guys prepare for this?
Well, we send it out. We obviously know when Roadcheck is going to happen early. And so, we make sure that our folks are scheduling the maximum amount of people that we have for that particular project. We send out the focus areas and make sure that everybody, that works for us is aware of what we're focusing on, the things we need to look at. But obviously, we're still going on with our day-to-day operations. So, while it is a focus area, we don't typically change a lot of things on our day to day. We still look for these focus areas every day, and I think the big focus areas right now for International Road Check are, your tires and logbooks. And obviously, tires is a very, it's one that can be overlooked, a lot. And if you don't have good tires, things like that, something can be very serious, with crashes and the industry slows down, commerce, those type of things. So, and then logbooks, or ELDs, we're looking at a lot of those. And then for the most part, folks do pretty good with the logbooks, but we are looking for sometimes tampering with the device. One of the big things we've been seeing now is the ghost driver issue, where, they're using somebody else's login on the ELD and logging lots of hours under one drive. So those will be some of the areas that we focus on during this road check.
Well, I know it was probably not a coincidence that when the ELD mandate went into effect, people thought, well, that was going to, I would say some people thought that's going to fix everything. There's going to be a lot less violations, things like that. But there's still violations that happen with the ELDs. And there's a lot of false logs that happen with ELDs. Obviously, with any of these focus areas, it's because of what's happened in the past. That's how they're selecting these areas, correct? I mean, that's, is it the previous year or the previous couple of years they look at and they say, well, we need to focus on these areas because of these violations that were written?
They do. They look back at, data from past years, 2 to 5 years, and they look at some of the what we call hotspot areas and violations that we're currently seeing. And like I said, one of those in the ELD is, and it was new because you didn't see a lot with paper logs, but with the ELD where they log in under 2 different drivers and then they just drive, multiple hours, and we're seeing a lot of that on the ghost driver side. Another thing that we've seen for years and has been an issue, and that's the use of PC. It's sometimes the guidance issued in PC is pretty vague, and so there is some room for interpretation there. But we do see a lot of misuse of PC. Some of the other things we've been seeing here lately, with the weather we're going to have, and obviously adverse driving conditions plays a factor into logging, and some folks are claiming adverse, when they weren't actually involved in an adverse. And most folks use the adverse driving condition for what it was intended for, and that's to get them to their destination during, bad weather or traffic crash, things like that. And then, we do see some folks that are, claiming off duty when they're doing work for the motor carrier. Obviously we see that when they're servicing their trucks, things like that, they still count as an on-duty situation when you're logging.
And a lot of these things, well, a few of them anyway, they kind of come into play because it's something that I see where it's not something that people utilize every day, or maybe they're not real familiar with the regulations. So they don't know for sure exactly how to use it, but they try to use it anyway. And that's potentially going to get them into a situation where they've got a false log there. Specifically with the personal conveyance that you mentioned, and the adverse conditions. Those are things that, if companies don't have, with the PC, if they don't have a process in place for their company that outlines what their drivers are supposed to do, and they leave it up to the individual driver, sometimes drivers aren't aware of what's required, what's not required, because like you said, it can be a little bit gray when you read through what the regs say. I think that's why it's important for the companies themselves to dig into that, to ask questions, to set up some boundaries. Obviously, if they have questions, they can reach out to enforcement folks and get some clarification on that. And I think that's one of the things I'd recommend to the folks listening to us is if, because Kevin, I talk to folks every day, and this particular topic of PC comes up quite a bit, and it's like we've just got to the point where we don't even allow it anymore because it causes so much problem. And I always say I understand that, but it's like there's an option for you there in the regs to be able to utilize that. I mean, it's there for a reason. So you can successfully utilize it. It's just you have to do it in the appropriate way.
I would agree. I think big thing is, like you said, carriers need to set strict policies on the use of PC, and that way, it's company wide and everybody knows, what they can and can't do on the carrier side. And then obviously, some of the things we do, part of our grant funding is that we provide outreach and education, for the motor carriers. And so getting together with your trucking associations, providing, outreach and education at your big safety meetings where we can discuss PC and some of these issues, that some carriers don't use often, and when they get in a situation where they need to use it, then they need to make sure they're using it properly. So I think, the goal for both the carrier and us is just to make sure that PC is used for its intended purposes, and when done so, is legitimate.
Well, and you mentioned something there that I don't know if you know this or not, but I offer this up. I do a training session on how to hold a safety meeting and get the most bang for your buck and do it in an appropriate way, really get something out of it. And one of the things I mentioned is reach out to enforcement folks, because you guys are, if you're available, if you've got the manpower, you've got the hours, whatever, you guys are more often than not going to be willing to come if somebody's holding a big safety meeting, come in and talk about some of these issues with drivers, with operations folks, whoever they've got there at their meeting. Because I've seen that in Missouri, I've seen it in other states, and you guys are willing to do that if you can.
Absolutely. Like I said, our ultimate goal is compliance, and if we can get you in compliance prior to ever contacting you on the road, then we've done what our job is. We don't always have to be that so-called bad guy roadside that's doing the inspection. I mean, obviously, outreach and education does a lot for us and gets us into the carrier and gets us contacts with the carrier. Because that's big, making sure we have contacts with those carriers as well. But it helps the carrier get in compliance, and then that's the ultimate goal for both enforcement and industry.
We talked a little bit about the ELD stuff that you guys are going to be looking at during the road check. Let's talk about the tires a little bit, because there's one thing that I tell folks a lot is there's things on tires that are pretty easy to notice, and they don't happen overnight. Like if you've got a tire and their tread depth is low, I mean, a tire doesn't go slick overnight. That's something a driver can catch in a pre-trip. But there's things that maybe they're going to have to do a little extra work on to catch, like maybe tire pressure, things like that. Because lately I have actually been seeing more and more of those violations where it's the tire pressure doesn't meet the requirement, and that violation's written. So that's all stuff that the different types of violations that can happen with the tire. It's not just the tread depth or a blown tire. There's conditions that those tires have to meet.
There is no doubt about it. I think some of the big ones we see are obviously flat or leaking tire, and we consider a flat tire anything that's less than 50% of the PSI on the sidewall of the tire. So when we stop and see a tire that looks low, we're obviously going to take a measurement of that tire, and typically we're taking it even when it's hot. So when that tire is stopped and it's not driving, the pressure is even going to be less. So we always tell the drivers, make sure they check the tire pressure in their PSI or in their pre-trip. Make sure they look at that. A couple of other things we see, you may have a flat spot on a tire, with the tread depth or a belt showing because they had a hard braking situation or something. They may not catch that if it's down, during their pre-trip. And so we always say, roll your truck forward, 8 to 10 inches during that pre-trip. That way you get to see all of that tire and not just a portion of it. The other thing we see quite a bit is sometimes the tires aren't rated, for the amount of weight they're carrying. So make sure the rating on the sidewall of that tire is for the amount of weight you have on that truck. And those are big areas that we see. Typically, though, it's the lower the flat tire, and some of them, they're just not preventable, right? We see them, where they'll run something over in the roadway. They may not know until they come into the weigh station or scale facility that tire is flat or leaking.
Well, one thing I'll say to the folks listening to us and your inspectors out there, Kevin, when they see a tire that they think is low, they're not just going to go up and thump that tire and say, yeah, it's pretty low. They're going to put a gauge on it and see how much air pressure it's got. So I would recommend the folks listening to us do the same. Get your driver's gauges. It's not, you can thump the tires to make sure that everything's good and do a quick check. But if you've got something you think's low, you're really not going to know what the pressure is unless you put a gauge on it and really determine what that is.
Yeah, that's correct. We tell our folks every tire that they check that, may end up citing that they need to have an air pressure or PSI listed on the inspection report. Now, obviously, if the tire's off the bead, it's shredded, things like that, then we're not going to waste our time taking a PSI. But we require that on the inspection report to make sure that way the driver knows, the company knows that's where the tire was at when we got them stopped.
Well, you made an excellent point a little bit ago where you said, so we've got the two focus areas. We've got the record of duty status, or the false record of duty status, and the tires. But you guys are doing, I mean, really, this is, yes, we have these focus areas, but this is business as usual for your guys. They're doing, it's not that that's the only thing they're looking at, right? I mean, they truck rolls through a scale, or it's a portable unit and they inspect a vehicle. They're going to do a full inspection just like they would any other day. We just have these two focus areas during the road check.
Yeah, and that's correct. Like I said, we tell our folks, to go ahead and look at everything on that truck, just like you would on a day-to-day basis. So, whether we do a level 1, a level 2, or a level 3 inspection on that, truck, may ultimately determine, where we go from there. But we definitely will look at these focus areas as well. But these are something we look at every day. Like I said, it's an everyday thing for us, so it doesn't change a lot the way we do business.
Well, let's talk about the outcomes of these inspections. So let's say one of your inspectors stops a vehicle, or on the portable unit, or they roll through a scale and they're doing an inspection. What are the possible outcomes we have for inspection? I mean, as far as once the inspection's fully complete, it's either we're good, we're clean, there's violations. I mean, what can happen after the inspection's completed?
Well, of course, what we would like to see is obviously an inspection with no violations, a clean inspection, and the driver's allowed to go on down the road. But there are times where we'll inspect a truck and we may find some violations, but that does not put the driver out of service. So obviously they're allowed to continue on their day, and then they just need to get those items corrected before they're dispatched out the next time. And then, worst case scenario is where you stop a truck and he has some pretty serious safety violations that would entail an out of service. And an out of service means, they have to have all those violations corrected before they leave the facility or where they're put out of service. So if we're inspecting, in a portable unit or roadside, we'll take them to an exit ramp or somewhere where we can get them off the road, and then we'll put them out of service at a safe location where they can then call repair to have come and fix those items. If they're at a scale facility, we have parking there, and they can call a repair facility there to get the items corrected and then on down the road. Now, some of these items, logbook wise, if they're out of service for logbook, sometimes that specifies, the number of hours they may have to stay. They may have to stay for, 10 hours. They may have to stay for 34 hours, depending on, how many hours they've got on their log. But those are all different from inspection to inspection.
So I mean, I guess with those type of violations, it kind of depends on if it's a fixed facility or a mobile facility, how you handle that, because obviously the fixed scale facilities, they're able to pull around and park right there. They're on the side of the road. That becomes a different issue. Like if you had a driver that it was an hours violation that placed them out of service and they had to be out of service for 10 hours, and it's a mobile unit that had stopped them and done the inspection. How do you handle that? Are they stuck on the side of the road? Do you try to get them somewhere where it's a safe location?
Yeah, no, we don't leave them on the side of the road. Typically, we'll escort them, back to a truck stop or a large parking area or somewhere that's, safe to have them off the road for that length of time. We don't want to leave a truck at an exit ramp or on the shoulder somewhere. That's not safe for the driver. It's not safe for the motoring public. And so we always escort them to a location that, is safe and that hopefully has some services for them. Obviously, sometimes when you're in a rural area in rural Missouri, not every place has a truck stop or some services for them, but we try to make every effort to do that.
Yeah. And it's obviously that's worst case, if you're out there driving a truck and you get an out of service violation on your truck, or for some reason the driver's got an out of service violation. But I want to make it clear to the folks listening there, that's, it's potentially two separate issues there. You could have a truck that's placed out of service, but the driver's fine. Or vice versa. You could have a driver placed out of service, but the truck's mechanically sound and it could go. So there's two separate issues there.
Absolutely.
CBSA decals. So let's talk about that a little bit. This is obviously Roadcheck is a CVSA sponsored thing. So we look at that, but when you get an inspection, you could potentially get this decal that CVSA puts out there. So explain that process a little bit, and when a truck or a trailer might get a CVSA decal.
Okay, yeah. So, when we do inspections on trucks, and obviously if they don't have violations in what we call your 13 critical inspection items, then we'll give a CVSA decal, and we'll get you could actually get two decals, one for the truck and one for the trailer if they both pass. That decal is good for then 90 days. And as long as an officer does not see a noticeable safety violation on that truck, then the truck should not be inspected during that 90-day time period. Now, you could get a CVSA decal one day and turn around and be going down the road and have some lights out or something on the backside of the trailer truck, which would get you stopped and inspected again. But that decal is good for 90 days if there's no noticeable safety violation.
And then they've got unique identifiers on them, so they know for sure it's like, hey, this is a valid sticker. It's got a number on it that shows, it goes with the inspection. But yeah, I've seen exactly what you were talking about, Kevin, where somebody gets a CVSA decal and literally later that day, truck pulls in and there's some defect wrong with it that's within those 13 areas. And obviously the decal comes off, new inspection's done. And it does happen because kind of like you mentioned with the tires earlier, sometimes, you pick up something on the road, something like that. Stuff happens when you're going down the road. It certainly does. So, it's not a 100% get out of jail free card to have one of those CVSA decals on that. The truck and trailer and load still have to meet safety requirements, obviously.
Yeah, they do. And like you said, that does happen sometimes. It's not something we see, often. But again, some of those items like lights and tires that get a lot of wear and tear on them, you are going to. So we hope that doesn't happen, but sometimes it does.
Well, unfortunately, that's why it's important for you folks listening to us, especially the drivers listening to us. Good pre-trips in the morning. And then you're looking at equipment over all day long because there's a regulatory requirement that at the end of the day, you're signing off on a driver vehicle inspection report that shows that, hey, these are things that I've found throughout the day. But you really need to be looking at that truck, that trailer, your load, your securement. You need to be looking that stuff over throughout the day. If you stop and fuel, if you're taking your 30-minute break, whatever it is, take a quick look around your truck, quick look around your trailer, and make sure that things look like they should look, and everything's still mechanically sound. Because, as we've been talking here, it takes a lot of wear and tear. There's thousands of miles that you're running. Things can, if you drive for 11 hours in a day and you don't ever look at your truck, there's a lot of things that can go wrong in that time period.
There is, a lot of moving parts, like you said. There's a lot of miles, and there's a lot of roads that they drive, and some of the roads aren't the smoothest roads. And so there's just a lot of wear and tear on those trucks. And so we tell drivers, any opportunity you get to take and look over that piece of equipment, you should do so. And I hate to say this, sometimes though, enforcement wise, we're not your biggest concern. Liability on the road is a driver's biggest concern, and so they want to mitigate that liability any way they can. And obviously, looking at that truck on a regular basis, checking those things over, making sure they're notifying the company, hey, I need this, I need that. That way, it mitigates that liability.
I'm glad you bring that up because that's something that we deal with on our side often as far as conversations go. But certainly, drivers need to do their jobs and their inspections on the trucks. But if motor carriers are made aware that something needs to be fixed on that truck, there's documentation of it for sure. They need to be fixing that, because the last thing you want, if you have a DOT recordable crash and you send one of your inspectors out there, Kevin, and they're going to do a post-crash investigation or an inspection on that. If there's contributing, if there's mechanical defects that were contributing to that crash, that's going to be an issue for the motor carrier.
It absolutely is. And we do post-crash inspections and reconstructions on every commercial vehicle fatality in Missouri. And so, when we do that post-crash inspection, that's one of the things we look at is, was that violation present before the crash, or did it happen as a result of the crash? And, most of the time, those violations are a result of the crash. When you have heavy front end damage, obviously lights aren't going to work, signals aren't going to work, things like that. But there are things, hours of service wise, maybe tires or brakes that, were present prior to that crash. And so that's why, again, it's behooves the driver to make sure that he checks those things, on a regular basis.
Well, you mentioned that this is kind of getting down a little bit of a rabbit trail here, but those post-crash inspections that you do, when it comes to that inspection report, it's going to be a part of it's going to be in the SMS system. It's going to show up there. But if it was as a result of the crash, are those violations held against the carrier like it would be if it was a contributing factor to the crash, like if the brakes were out of adjustment or something?
No, they don't. So even though they're listed on the inspection report, those are things that they've got to get fixed before that truck goes back on the road. But no, they do not count in a carrier's SMS if they were caused by that crash. And each inspection report is labeled post-crash inspection, and then over on the violation section, it has a section that says crash, and it'll say either yes or no. If that shows that it was caused by the crash, which is yes, then they don't contribute to that carrier's SMS. They no longer drive with PSP.
Well, you said something when we started this conversation that I think is about what you do with your inspectors out there on the road and the scales, and I think it is important for the folks listening to us as well, both drivers and motor carriers. As you said, you get the topics for this road check early in advance, so you know what's coming. But the really good thing about this event is we get, on the carrier side, we get the answers to the test too. We know what's coming, right? We know, it's like we get the focus areas. We know tires and hours of service, so we know what's coming. And as you said before, compliance is kind of the key here to all of this. At the very least, if we're leading up to road check and there's a safety meeting or some safety information they're going to send out to drivers, at the very least have this information in that meeting, because that's going to be the focus area.
That's right. I mean, we don't want it to be a mystery. We want folks to know these are the areas we're looking at. And so these are the areas as a carrier, you should target in your safety meetings, and you should target in your pre-trips. And, you should hammer out to the drivers that, hey, these are the things that we need to make sure that we're up on. And we do the same with our inspectors. So, we know well in advance, like you said, we've got the answers to the test. So we want to make sure they're prepared and that they're up to speed on everything that we're looking at.
Yeah, because ultimately, if you go through a 72-hour window for road check and you have no violation, like if you had the majority of your inspections that your folks did that had no violations on them, that's not a failure. That's a success. I mean, that means people were listening prior to and said, okay, we're going to run all of our trucks through and get an inspection before this comes. And then we're going to do some training on hours of service. We're going to make sure everybody's up to speed on the requirements. That's a success, right? I mean, that's what we're after, that compliance with the regulations.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah. That's a success. Just like, our goal of zero fatalities, our goal would be to have zero violations on an inspection report. That is truly what we're working for. We don't take joy in listing and finding a bunch of violations. We would much rather hand out clean inspections, and that's the ultimate goal of enforcement and industry.
So are you, and this is just kind of a curiosity question for me, does the FMCSA investigators, do they come out during road check to the scale houses and do inspections as well, or is that that something you open up to them?
We do. So we open up our scale facilities to them, depending on, where they're located in the state. And we've always had that open invitation to have them come and work with our personnel, and they can do inspections as well. And it's another way for FMCSA, to contact the drivers, to contact the carriers, to build some of those relationships as well with our personnel and their personnel. So we have done that quite often, and we even bring PHMSA folks out as well, to pipeline hazardous material folks. They come and work with us as well, and it's a good opportunity for everybody.
Do you guys ever work with any municipal departments? I know, like Kansas City, St. Louis, they've got their own commercial vehicle enforcement folks. Do you do any work with them?
We do. So we work, closely with KCPD, St. Louis Metro PD, St. Louis County PD, and then our newest on board is the Springfield, Missouri Police Department as well. And so we work very closely with them. We provide their training We oversee their program. So, and you know, we have a very good relationship with municipalities here in Missouri that do inspections. So we always ask them to participate in any of these CVSA events and programs that we do.
Yeah, that's something that it just kind of depends on the state, I'm sure, as far as, you know, how many municipal departments there are that are MCSAP, receivers of those MCSAP funds to do those inspections. And but if they have those, they go through. You mentioned the training; they go through the exact same training. They're just as qualified. They have the same. You know, there's requirements they have to meet to do those level ones, twos, whatever inspections that they're doing out there on the road. I mean, they're just as certified as any highway patrol officer that's out there.
And that's correct. They go through the same training we do. You know, they get the same, you know, scrutiny from day to day as well. They have data queues just like we do. So, you know, they have to be on the up and up. And like I said, we work with them a lot. We provide all their training, you know, here in Missouri. The patrol has most of the instructors that do the CVSA training. So we provide training to all their folks. We provide in service to them every year, just like we do our personnel. And so they receive the same training and documentation that we do.
So we've got the agencies that I guess I would say that are involved. We've got Missouri State Highway Patrol, the FMCSA, PHMSA, and then St. Louis, the folks over in St. Louis, both county and city, Kansas City, and then Springfield now. Anybody else involved with the process? Because I'm just trying to lay out geographically for the folks here in Missouri anyway, you know, who's going to be doing inspections and where you might see heightened enforcement during this road check.
Yeah, the only other agency that we have that really doesn't affect, you know, the folks going up and down the road, we did train Fort Leonard Wood DOD police, and they do all their inspections on the base, you know, so they have a lot of commercial traffic in and out of the base, and so they do inspections there. But that is the limit of who we have doing inspections here in Missouri. And, you know, partly those agencies were selected because they are typically what we call our high crash corridors. You know, that's where the most commercial vehicle crashes occur. And so you want to focus your resources on those areas.
Well, I know that you guys will be busy during that time. It's just like the motor carriers out there. They're going to keep rolling. They're going to keep moving freight, but it's kind of business as usual for you guys as well. So I really like the message that you've put out there, Kevin, where you're saying, I mean, compliance is the goal, and we're all kind of in this for the same reason, because ultimately the more compliant that a motor carrier is, the safer they're going to be. I mean, hopefully that's going to make our roadways safer. And that's always what we're looking for, is to not only get that driver home safe, but they're out there with just the general motoring public, and really to get everybody home safe. The last thing we want to see is a crash out there on the road involving a commercial motor vehicle. And I know that's what you guys are focused on. The FMCSA is focused on, is reducing crashes out there on the roadway. So I appreciate that message that you're giving us today. I think it's important for us all to realize we're working for the same thing here when it comes to safety.
Absolutely, we are. You know, like I said earlier, you know, safety is a two-way street. You know, enforcement has their part, but the carrier and the drivers have their part as well. And you can't do it one without the other. So there has to be some cooperation, and everybody has to work together. And ultimately, you know, our goal would be zero fatalities. Sometimes, you know, that's a tough goal to get, but, you know, every year we look to reduce fatalities if we can and make our roadways safer, because our families, your families, their families, and we all travel up and down the road, and we want to make sure they're safe.
That's right. I think about that a lot, and I say that a lot when I'm visiting with drivers or companies when we're doing safety meetings, is when you make it personal like that, you think about not just you doing your job out there driving a truck, but when you think about your wife, your husband, your kids, your grandkids, when they're out there on the road, to me, it kind of brings it home a little bit about the importance of what you guys do, about what the motor carriers are doing. It's often a life or death situation, and obviously it's something that it's a calculated risk that motor carriers take every day when those trucks are rolling. But the goal is, let's do this as safely as absolutely possible. And I think having these conversations like this is something that's important, because I feel like the things that you talk about, that you give importance to, that you put in the light, I think those things are areas where you improve, and the things that you don't talk about and the things that you just ignore, things like that, it can come back and bite you. And that's where you see those accidents out there on the road that can cause injury, can cause death. And obviously that's what we're trying to avoid here.
Absolutely. Everybody at some point in their life uses the roadway. And, that's can be one of the biggest risk factors that we do every day. And some we probably take for granted, because we drive every day, whether it be, 5 miles to the store, or, thousands of miles on vacation. And so we want to make sure that every time we buckle up and we get in that vehicle, that we're safe, and that we're safe for other folks that use that road as well.
Absolutely. Couldn't agree more. Well, for the CVSA road check coming up, it's May 13th through the 15th. So if you're listening to us, as we said before, we've got the answers to the test. If you go to www.roadcheck.org, there's a lot of information there. They've got the North American Standard Roadside Inspection diagrams and the driver cheat sheets, the vehicle cheat sheets, all that stuff's on there. The focused areas are on there. They provide that stuff in multiple languages. So I encourage you, if you're listening to us, go out there, check that information out, present it to your team. And when I say your team, I mean your drivers, your operations folks, everybody at your company. Get that information. That's something that you should be providing prior to road check. And then I'm always going to recommend that you, if you've got a shop, if you've got mechanics on staff, run your trucks through, have them looked over real well. I think that's an important part of not only being successful passing a 72-hour road check, but just being a safe overall motor carrier. That's something that I think is going to be beneficial for you.
I will say a maintenance program, makes those trucks. And like you said, a lot of them don't get back to the shops. And so they need to make sure that they are operating.
Yeah, and it's tough. Sometimes those, if you've got a lot of companies have in-house shops, a lot don't, so they're using third-party maintenance providers, things like that. So it's even more of a challenge, maybe even more of an investment to get those trucks inspected, get them looked over. But again, that's something that it's important not only for you guys to be in compliance, but as you said, Kevin, a good maintenance program. You may be finding things on those trucks that might contribute to a crash. If we can find those things early, get them repaired, get parts replaced, whatever the situation may be, you may be saving yourself from an accident that happens out there on the roadway. We certainly want to avoid that. Anything else you want to share with us? You got the mic, Kevin. I certainly will take advantage of the time I've got with you.
Well, I always appreciate, you guys and the industry and the insurance and everybody, including us on a lot of these podcasts and, safety meetings and things like that. Because I've said it time and time again, this doesn't work unless everybody involved is cooperating. It's a big moving wheel, and everybody has to be involved and do their part or it won't work. And so I truly appreciate the fact, that you guys reach out and we're included and we enjoy doing this thing.
Well, we certainly appreciate you being here, and I couldn't have said that any better myself. It takes all of us to work towards those safer roads. So, Kevin, thanks for joining us. Appreciate you more than you know, and hopefully we can do this again sometime. I really appreciate it.
I appreciate it, Mike, and thank you very much.
Well, to our listeners out there, thanks for joining us. We've had Captain Kevin Kelly with us today with the Missouri State Highway Patrol. Enjoyed all of his expertise and wisdom that he's shared with us. Please join us next time. We're going to be talking about the topic of road rage, and Jim and Barry will be discussing that topic. So you won't want to miss that. Please join them for that episode, and be safe out there on the road. We appreciate you, and catch us next time right here on Driving the Line.
That's all the time we have for this edition of Driving the Line, the pursuit of safety. We hope you enjoyed our discussion, and thank you for listening. You can rate, review, and subscribe to Driving the Line, the pursuit of safety on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube Music, or any other app you're using. You can also follow Marsh McLennan Agency on LinkedIn, Facebook, and Instagram. Until the next time, thanks again for listening. Drive safely, everyone.